He thought his billions bought him the right to be a monster. Sheikh Zaid al-Hassan wasn't just wealthy. He was a force of nature who believed the world existed to serve him. He stood in the center of New York's most prestigious dining hall, mocking the waitress in rapid-fire, brutal Arabic, convinced she was too uneducated to understand a single word. He called her street trash. He called her invisible. He laughed at her poverty, but he made one fatal calculation. He didn't know who she really was, and when she finally locked eyes with him and responded in flawless, high court Arabic, the silence that followed was louder than any scream. This is the story of how one waitress brought an empire to its knees. The rain over Manhattan wasn't just falling, it was punishing the pavement. It hammered against the dark, tinted windows of Le Ciel, a restaurant that sat on the 45th floor of a skyscraper overlooking Central Park. Inside, the atmosphere was a desperate attempt at calm. The clinking of crystal flutes and the murmur of seven-figure deals being made filled the air, but the tension in the staff was palpable. Sarah Jenkins adjusted her apron, her fingers trembling slightly. It wasn't the work that exhausted her. It was the facade. At 26, Sarah had the kind of beauty that people often overlooked because she wore it like armor. Hair pulled back in a severe bun, no makeup, eyes focused on the floor. She was a ghost in the machine of the service industry. "Table 4 is open, Sarah," the manager, Mr. Thompson, hissed as he speed-walked past her. Thompson was a man who sweated even in air conditioning. He was terrified of his clientele. "And fix your collar. We have VIPs coming in. Real money. Not the Wall Street tech bro garbage. Old money." "I know, Mr. Thompson," Sarah said, her voice low and steady. "I'm ready." She wasn't ready. She was tired. Her feet throbbed from a double shift she had picked up to pay for her mother's medical bills. Her life was a spreadsheet of debts and deadlines. She checked her reflection in the polished brass of the espresso machine. She looked like exactly what she was: a servant. At 8:15 p.m., the elevator doors at the private entrance slid open with a heavy, expensive whoosh. The atmosphere in the restaurant shifted instantly. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room. 4 men walked in first, security. They wore earpieces and suits that cost more than Sarah's annual rent. They scanned the room with predatory efficiency. Then he entered. Sheikh Zaid al-Hassan. Sarah recognized him immediately, not from tabloids, but from the geopolitical journals she used to read during her university days, back before everything fell apart. He was the head of the Al-Hassan Sovereign Fund. He didn't walk, he glided, carrying an aura of absolute, terrifying authority. He was handsome, in a cruel, sharp way, with eyes that looked like they could cut glass, and a jawline that suggested he had never been told no in his entire life. He was flanked by his personal advisor, a British man named Arthur Sterling, who looked like a snake in a pinstripe suit, and his cousin, Kareem, who was staring at his phone, bored. Mr. Thompson practically sprinted to the host stand, bowing so low Sarah thought he might snap his spine. "Your Highness," Thompson stammered, We are honored, truly honored. We didn't expect you until 9. Zaid didn't even look at him. He looked through him. He waved a hand dismissively, his eyes scanning the dining floor. He pointed a gloved finger at table 4, the prime window seat overlooking the storm-drenched city lights. "That one," Zaid said. His voice was deep, accented, and brooked no argument. Thompson went pale. "Sir, Your Highness, that table is reserved. The Governor of New York is arriving in 20 minutes. We have the private alcove prepared for you. It is much more secluded and—" Zaid stopped walking. He turned his head slowly to look at Thompson. The restaurant went silent. "Did I ask about the governor?" Zaid asked softly. "No, sir, but—" "I want that table," Zaid said, starting to walk toward it. "Move the governor, or buy him dinner. I do not care." He sat down at table 4 without waiting for it to be cleared of the reserved sign. He simply flicked the heavy card off the table like it was a piece of lint. It fluttered to the floor. Thompson looked like he was going to faint. He frantically signaled Sarah. "Go," he whispered, pushing her forward. "Serve him. Keep him happy. If he leaves, we lose the account for his entire delegation. Do you hear me? Do not mess this up." Sarah took a breath. She grabbed her ordering pad. She walked into the lion's den. As she approached the table, Zaid was already engaged in a heated conversation with Arthur Sterling. They weren't speaking English. They were speaking Arabic, specifically a Gulf dialect mixed with high-level financial jargon. Sarah stopped at the edge of the table, waiting for a break in the conversation to introduce herself. It was standard protocol. "You do not interrupt a billionaire." Zaid ignored her. He was angry. "These Americans are incompetent," Zaid said in Arabic, his voice dripping with venom. "The merger should have been completed yesterday. Why am I sitting in this rain-soaked city dealing with amateurs?" "Patience, Your Highness," Arthur replied in English, clearly not fluent in Arabic. "The deal requires finesse." Zaid switched to English for a brief second to address Arthur, then looked up at Sarah. He didn't see a person. He saw an obstacle. "Water," he commanded, "sparkling, no ice. And tell the chef if I see a single onion in my food, I will buy this building and evict everyone in it." "Yes, sir," Sarah said, keeping her head down. "Would you like to see the wine list?" Zaid laughed, a cold, dry sound. He turned to his cousin, Karim, and switched back to Arabic. "Look at her," Zaid said in Arabic, gesturing vaguely at Sarah with his hand, standing there like a frightened rabbit. "Do you think she even knows how to wash her hands properly? This place is supposed to be high class, yet the staff smells of public transport and desperation." Karim chuckled, not looking up from his phone. "Just order the food, Zaid. Stop torturing the help." "It offends me," Zaid continued in Arabic, leaning back and looking Sarah up and down with open disdain. "Look at that uniform. It hangs off her like a sack. She has the posture of a peasant who has spent too much time scrubbing floors. It is pathetic that I must be served by someone so beneath me." Sarah's hand tightened around her notepad. Her knuckles turned white. She understood every single word. She knew the dialect. She knew the slang. She knew the specific intonation of arrogance he was using, but she did nothing. She had bills to pay. She nodded, swallowed her pride, and turned to walk away to get the water. "Wait," Zaid barked in English. Sarah stopped and turned back. "Yes, sir?" "You didn't take my order," he said, his eyes narrowing. "Are you deaf as well as slow?" "I was getting the water first, sir, as you requested," Sarah replied, her voice remaining polite, but losing its warmth. "Do not talk back to me," Zaid snapped. He pointed at the menu. "I want the lamb. Rare. And bring me the manager. I don't like your face. You look miserable. It ruins my appetite." It was a cruelty so unnecessary, so casual, that it took Sarah's breath away. "I apologize if my appearance offends you, sir," Sarah said, her chin lifting slightly. "It has been a long night." Zaid stared at her. He wasn't used to eye contact. Most people looked at his shoes or his watch. Sarah was looking right into his pupils. He turned to his cousin and spoke in Arabic again, louder this time, assuming the privacy of his language was an ironclad shield. "She has fire," Zaid mocked in Arabic. "A dirty little stray cat hissing at a tiger. I should have her fired just to see her beg. I bet she would beg nicely. These American women have no dignity. Give them $100 and they will crawl. Sarah felt a heat rise in her chest that had nothing to do with the kitchen ovens. It was the heat of a dormant volcano waking up. She had spent 5 years in the Middle East. She had a master's degree in Near Eastern languages. She was the daughter of a diplomat who had been stationed in Jordan and Dubai before the scandal that ruined her family. She wasn't just a waitress. She was a scholar who had lost her way. And she had just been called a dirty stray cat. She took a deep breath. She could walk away. She could get the water. She could keep her job. Or she could light the match. Sarah stood frozen for a moment. The restaurant hummed around them, oblivious to the verbal assault taking place at table 4. "Well," Zaid said in English, waving his hand as if shooing a fly. "Go, get out of my sight." Sarah turned on her heel and walked to the service station. Her hands were shaking, not from fear anymore, but from a rage so pure it felt like clarity. She poured the sparkling water. No ice, just as he asked. Mr. Thompson scurried over to her. "Is everything okay? He looks angry, Sarah. Why does he look angry?" "He's a bully, Mr. Thompson," Sarah said, placing the bottle on her tray. "He's a billionaire," Thompson squeaked. "He can be a cannibal for all I care, as long as he pays the bill. Just smile." "Why aren't you smiling?" "I'm going back out there," Sarah said, ignoring him. She walked back to the table. Zaid was now arguing with Arthur Sterling about the acquisition of a tech firm in Silicon Valley. "The price is too high," Sterling was saying. "They want $4 billion. "Let them starve," Zaid said in Arabic, cutting him off. "They are desperate. Wait 2 weeks. They will come crawling for $2 billion. I want to crush their CEO. He disrespected me in Davos." Sarah placed the water on the table. She poured it with the precision of a surgeon. Zaid didn't thank her. He picked up the glass, took a sip, and then slammed it down. "I said no ice," he said. There was no ice in the glass. "There is no ice, sir," Sarah said calmly. "It is too cold," Zaid lied. He was bored. He wanted a reaction. He wanted to exercise power because he was frustrated with his business deal. "It hurts my teeth. Take it away. Bring me room temperature." Sarah looked at the bottle. It was room temperature. He was gaslighting her. "Sir," she said, her voice firming up. "The bottle was on the shelf. It is not chilled." Zaid stood up. The movement was sudden and aggressive. The restaurant went quiet again. Even the governor, who had just arrived and was being awkwardly ushered to a smaller table, paused to look. "Are you calling me a liar?" Zaid asked, his voice booming. "I am stating a fact," Sarah said. She didn't back down. She didn't shrink. Zaid's face darkened. He turned to the manager, who was already running towards them. "Thompson!" Zaid shouted. "This woman is incompetent. She is rude. She argues with me. I want her out of here. Now." Thompson arrived, sweating profusely. Yes, Your Highness. Immediately." "Sarah, leave. Go to the back. You're done for the night." "Done for the night?" Zaid laughed cruelly. "No, I'll fire her. Terminate her employment. Or I buy this building and turn it into a parking garage. Choose." Thompson looked at Sarah, his eyes pleading. He was a weak man, and fear made him cruel. "Sarah, you're fired. Get your things. Go." Sarah looked at Thompson, then at Zaid. Zaid smirked. It was a smile of pure triumph. He leaned in close to her, lowering his voice so only she and his table could hear. He switched to Arabic for his final insult, the coup de grace. "Go back to your gutter, you worthless girl," he hissed in Arabic. "You were never meant to stand in rooms like this. You are dust beneath my feet." He turned his back on her, dismissing her existence, and sat down, adjusting his napkin. He looked at his cousin and laughed. That was satisfying. "Now let's order." Sarah didn't move. The silence stretched. 1 second, 2 seconds. Then Sarah spoke. "It is interesting," she said. The sound of her voice was different, deeper, resonant, and she wasn't speaking English. She was speaking Arabic, and not just any Arabic. She was speaking the dialect of the royal court, Fusha, mixed with the specific high society idioms of Zayd's own home region. Her accent was flawless, carrying the poetic rhythm that only a true scholar or native could master. Zayd froze. His hand, holding the menu, stopped in midair. "It is interesting," Sarah repeated, her Arabic flowing like dark honey, "that a man who claims to be a king acts with the manners of a street thief." The entire table went rigid. Zayd's cousin, Karim, dropped his phone. It clattered onto the china plate. Arthur Sterling looked confused, but he saw the color drain from Zayd's face. Zayd turned around slowly. His eyes were wide, the arrogance replaced by shock. "What did you say?" he whispered in Arabic. Sarah took a step forward. She wasn't the waitress anymore. She was the daughter of Ambassador Richard Jenkins, the man who had taught her that language was the ultimate weapon. "I said," Sarah continued, her voice rising so the neighboring tables could hear the tone, even if they didn't understand the words, "that money can buy you a table, and it can buy you fear, but it cannot buy you class. You called me a stray cat. You called me dust. You insulted my hygiene and my intelligence." She gestured to the room. "You sit here, in a country not your own, and you mock the people who serve you because you are insecure about your own merger. Yes, I heard that too. You are trying to crush the Silicon Valley deal because the CEO hurt your feelings in Davos. You are not a businessman, Sheikh Zayed. You are a child throwing a tantrum in a very expensive suit." Zayed stood up, knocking his chair over. "Who are you?" he demanded in English, his composure shattered. Sarah switched back to English, her voice crisp and clear. "I'm the waitress you just fired," she said, "and I'm the woman who knows that your sparkling water was just an excuse to be cruel." She untied her apron and threw it on the table. It landed right on top of his expensive bone china plate. "I don't need this job that badly," she said. "But you need a lesson in humanity." She turned to Mr. Thompson, who was standing with his mouth open, looking like a fish out of water. "Goodbye, Mr. Thompson. You can mail me my final check." Sarah turned and walked toward the exit. Her head was high, her back was straight. The entire restaurant was silent, watching her leave. Zayd stood there, his chest heaving. He had been insulted in front of his entourage. He had been undressed intellectually by a server. "Stop her!" Zayd shouted to his bodyguards. The 4 security guards moved to block the door. Sarah stopped. She turned around slowly. "Are you going to kidnap me in the middle of Manhattan, Your Highness?" she asked loudly. "Because I don't think your diplomatic immunity covers abduction." Zayd waved his hand, signaling his guards to stand down. He wasn't going to kidnap her. He was intrigued. He was furious, yes, but for the first time in 10 years, he was actually interested. He walked toward her, stepping over his fallen chair. He stopped 3 feet away from her. The smell of his cologne, oud wood and tobacco, wafted toward her. "You speak the dialect of the inner circle," Zayd said, his voice low, dangerous. "Where did you learn it?" "Books," Sarah lied, "and listening to people who think they are too important to be understood." "You are a spy," Zayd accused. "Who sent you? The Saudis? The Chinese?" "I'm a waitress, Zayd," she said, using his first name without the title. It was a slap in the face. "Just a waitress." She pushed past the confused security guards and walked out into the rain. Zayd watched the door swing shut. The sound echoed in the silent restaurant. He turned to Arthur Sterling. "Find out who she is," Zayd commanded. I want to know everything. Where she was born, who her father is, what she eats for breakfast. I want her file on my desk by tomorrow morning." "Sir," Arthur said nervously, "you fired her. She's gone." Zaid stared at the empty door. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. "No," Zaid said. "She is just beginning." The subway ride back to Queens was a blur of fluorescent lights and the smell of wet wool. Sarah sat squeezed between a sleeping construction worker and a teenager blasting music, but she heard nothing. The adrenaline from the confrontation at Le Ciel was fading, replaced by the crushing weight of reality. She checked her bank account on her cracked phone screen. Balance: 412 nutrodals. Her rent was due in 3 days. It was $1,200. Her mother's medication, experimental enzyme blockers that insurance refused to cover, was $800 a week. "Stupid," Sarah whispered to herself, resting her forehead against the cold subway glass. "You stupid, proud idiot." She had won the argument, but she had lost the war. Pride didn't pay for dialysis. Pride didn't keep the lights on. She had humiliated a billionaire, and for what? A moment of satisfaction? She got off at her stop and walked 6 blocks in the drizzle to a run-down brick building that smelled permanently of boiled cabbage. Her apartment was a 4th-floor walk-up, a tiny studio where the bedroom was just a mattress separated from the kitchen by a hung sheet. As she unlocked the door, her phone rang. It was the nursing home. "Miss Jenkins?" the night nurse asked. "It's about your mother. She's had another episode. She's stable now, but the doctor says the current treatment isn't aggressive enough. We need to switch her to the private specialist you discussed, or what?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "Or her cognitive decline will become permanent within the month." Sarah slid down the wall, sitting on the floor with her wet coat still on. I'm working on the deposit for the specialist. Please, just give me a few more days. We can't hold the spot forever, Sarah. You know that." Sarah hung up. She stared at the water stain on the ceiling. She was the daughter of Richard Jenkins, a man who once negotiated peace treaties in the Middle East. She had grown up in embassies. She had shaken hands with kings. And now, she couldn't even save the only family she had left. Meanwhile, across the city, in the penthouse suite of the Pierre Hotel, the mood was electric. Sheikh Zaid al-Hassan was pacing. He had changed out of his suit into a silk robe, but his energy was manic. On the glass coffee table lay a single manila folder. Arthur Sterling stood by the window, swirling a glass of scotch. He looked nervous. "It's late, Your Highness," Arthur said. "We have the merger meeting with Titan Tech at 8:00 a.m. You should sleep. The girl is irrelevant. Just a waitress with a chip on her shoulder." "She's not irrelevant," Zaid snapped. He picked up the folder. "Did you read this, Arthur? Or are you too busy drinking my whiskey?" "I skimmed it," Arthur muttered. "Sarah Jenkins," Zaid read aloud. "Daughter of Richard Jenkins." Zaid looked up, his dark eyes intense. "Do you know that name, Arthur? It sounds vaguely familiar. A disgraced diplomat, wasn't he?" "Disgraced?" Zaid laughed bitterly. "He was framed. 10 years ago, Richard Jenkins was the U.S. ambassador to my country. When I was a young man, just out of university, my father, the king, invited Jenkins to the palace. I sat in on those meetings. Jenkins was the only Westerner who didn't talk down to us. He spoke flawless Arabic. He understood our history. He was a lion." Zaid threw the file back on the table. "Then came the scandal," Zaid continued. "Embezzlement, selling state secrets. He was stripped of his rank, his pension, his reputation. He committed suicide 6 months later." "A tragedy," Arthur said, his voice flat. "But what does this have to do with us? The daughter is obviously bitter. She hates men like you because she blames wealth for her father's fall. She hates me because I acted like a fool, Zaid corrected him. He walked to the window, looking out at the city that Sarah was somewhere lost in. She spoke the royal dialect, Arthur. Do you know how rare that is? She didn't learn that from books. She learned it at her father's knee, in the halls of power. So? Arthur pressed. She is a liability. If the press finds out you got into a shouting match with a waitress, it will look bad for the merger. Titan Tech values progressive ideals. They won't like you bullying a woman. Zaid turned slowly to look at Arthur. You are worried about the merger? Zaid asked softly. I am worried about your reputation, Zaid. I am your advisor. Then advise me, Zaid said. The translation during the preliminary talks yesterday. You said the Titan CEO was hesitant about the price. Yes, Arthur nodded quickly. He thinks our offer of $2 billion is too low. He was insulted. He wants to walk away. I see, Zaid murmured. He looked back at the file on the table. A photo of Sarah was clipped to the front, a grainy ID photo, but her eyes were unmistakable, fierce, intelligent, unafraid. I don't trust the translators, Arthur, Zaid said. They work for the firm. They work for you. I feel like I am walking through a room with the lights off. I have served you faithfully for 5 years, Arthur said, his jaw tightening. Then you won't mind if I hire an independent consultant, Zaid said. Arthur froze. Who? Her, Zaid pointed at the file. The waitress? Arthur sputtered, almost dropping his drink. You must be joking. She just insulted you. She's unstable. She is honest, Zaid said. She had nothing to lose, so she told me the truth. Everyone else around me, including you, Arthur, tells me what I want to hear. I need the truth. She will never work for you, Arthur scoffed. She hates you. Zaid smiled, a cold, calculated expression returning to his face. He picked up his phone. Every woman has a price, Arthur. And I know hers. He tapped the section of the file detailing her debts. Prepare the car. We are going to Queens. Now? Arthur looked at his watch. It's 1:15 a.m. Money does not sleep, Zaid said, and neither does desperation. The knock on the door was heavy and authoritative. Sarah jumped. She had been dozing on the floor, surrounded by unpaid bills. She looked at the clock. 1:45 a.m. Panic spiked in her chest. Police? Landlord? She stood up, grabbing a heavy metal candlestick she kept for protection. She crept to the door. Who is it? She called out, her voice rasping. Open the door, Miss Jenkins, a deep voice replied. She froze. She knew that voice. It was the voice that had demanded sparkling water without ice. Go away, she shouted. I'm calling the police. I have already spoken to the police captain in this precinct, the voice said calmly. His benevolence fund just received a very generous donation. Open the door, Sarah. I am not here to hurt you. I am here to make a purchase. Sarah hesitated. If he wanted to hurt her, he wouldn't be knocking. He would have kicked the door in. She undid the 3 locks and cracked the door open, the chain still on. Sheikh Zaid al-Hassan stood in the dim hallway. He was wearing a cashmere coat that cost more than her entire building. Behind him stood 2 large bodyguards, blocking the stairwell. What do you want? Sarah demanded. To talk, Zaid said. He looked at the peeling paint on her door. May I come in? The hallway smells of regret. You can talk from there, Sarah said. Zaid sighed. He reached into his coat pocket. Sarah tensed, gripping the candlestick, but he pulled out a check. He held it up to the crack in the door. Sarah squinted. It was a cashier's check, made out to St. Mary's Care Home. The amount was $150,000. Sarah's breath hitched. That was enough for 2 years of care. It was enough for the specialist. It was her mother's life, printed on a piece of paper. "Bribery," she hissed. "You think you can buy my silence about what a jerk you are?" "No," Zaid said. "This is a hiring bonus. Open the door, Sarah." Sarah looked at the check, then at his eyes. They weren't mocking anymore. They were serious. She closed the door, undid the chain, and opened it wide. Zaid stepped into the tiny apartment. He looked around, taking in the mattress on the floor, the stack of ramen noodles on the counter, the sheer poverty of her existence. He didn't sneer, though. His expression was unreadable. "You live like a monk," he said. "I live like someone paying off her father's debts," Sarah said bitterly. "State seized everything. You know that. You looked me up." "I did," Zaid admitted. "I remember Richard. He was a good man." Sarah stiffened. "Don't say his name." "He was," Zaid insisted. "I never believed the charges. But that is not why I am here." He walked to the single rickety chair in the room and dusted it off with a gloved hand before sitting. "I have a meeting in 7 hours," Zaid said, "with Titan Tech. It is a hostile takeover disguised as a merger. If I win, my fund controls the future of AI in the Middle East. If I lose, I look weak, and my enemies at home will circle like sharks." "Sounds like a rich person problem," Sarah said, crossing her arms. "Why tell me?" "Because I don't trust my ears," Zaid said. He looked at her intensely. "My advisor, Arthur Sterling, claims the other side is balking. He translates their hesitation as greed. But I watch their faces, Sarah. I see confusion, not greed. I think something is being lost in translation, deliberately." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "You think you're being played?" "I think I am being managed," Zaid said. "I need someone who speaks the language of power, someone who can sit behind me and tell me not just what they say, but what they mean. Someone who isn't on my payroll, or anyone else's." "You want me to be your spy," Sarah said. "I want you to be my consultant," Zaid corrected. "For 1 week, the duration of the negotiations." He pointed to the check on the table. "That covers your mother's bills. In addition, I will pay you $20,000 for the week, and I will put you up in the hotel." Sarah looked at the check. It was freedom. It was safety. But it was also working for the man who had called her street trash. "You humiliated me," Sarah said quietly. "You treated me like I was invisible." Zaid stood up. He was tall, looming over her in the small space. "I was wrong," he said. It was 2 words, but from a man like him, it was an earthquake. "I judged you by your uniform," Zaid said. "It was a mistake. I am a man who values quality, and I missed the quality standing right in front of me. I apologize." He held out his hand. "Help me win this deal, Sarah, and you can save your mother. Refuse, and you stay here with your pride and your poverty." Sarah looked at his hand. It was manicured, strong. She looked at the photo of her mother on the nightstand, a photo from before the stroke, when she was smiling. Sarah took his hand. "I have conditions," she said. Zaid smiled. "I expected nothing less." "1," Sarah said, her voice hard. "I don't wear a uniform. I wear my own clothes. 2, you never speak to me disrespectfully again. If you snap your fingers at me, I walk, and I keep the money." "Agreed," Zaid said. "And 3, Sarah added, stepping closer to him. "If I find out you had anything to do with my father's downfall, if your family was involved in the frame-up, I will burn your empire to the ground from the inside." Zaid's smile faded. He looked at her with a newfound respect. "If I had anything to do with it," Zaid said solemnly, "I would hand you the matches myself." He checked his gold watch. We have 6 hours to get you a wardrobe and brief you on the files. Let's go. The boardroom at Titan Tech was a glass box suspended over the Hudson River. It screamed innovation and sterility. On one side of the long mahogany table sat the Titan team, 3 men in hoodies and blazers, led by their CEO, Mark Rayson, a jittery genius who tapped his pen constantly. On the other side sat Sheikh Zayed, looking like a statue of judgment. Arthur Sterling sat to his right, and to his left, sitting slightly back, was Sarah. She had been transformed. Gone was the waitress uniform. Zayd's stylists had been woken up at 4 a.m. Sarah now wore a tailored navy power suit, her hair blow-dried into sleek waves, her makeup sharp and professional. She looked every inch the diplomat's daughter. Arthur Sterling had nearly choked on his coffee when he saw her walk into the briefing room that morning. He had tried to protest, but Zayd had silenced him with a look. Now, the meeting was underway. "We respect the Al Hassan Fund," Mark Rayson said, speaking fast. "But the valuation... Look, the algorithm we've built isn't just code, it's neural architecture. We're worried about the cultural fit." Arthur Sterling leaned into the microphone to translate into Arabic for Zayd, even though Zayd understood English. It was a power play Arthur used to filter information. "He says the price is still the issue," Arthur said in Arabic. "He says they want more money because they don't think we can manage the technology." Sarah's eyes flickered. That wasn't what Rayson had said. Rayson hadn't mentioned money. He had said cultural fit. He was worried about censorship. He was worried Zayd would use the AI for surveillance. Zayd looked at Sarah. He gave a microscopic nod. Sarah leaned forward. She spoke in English, her voice calm and authoritative. "Mr. Rayson," Sarah said. The Titan team looked at her, surprised. They thought she was just an assistant. "When you say cultural fit, are you referring to the financial structure, or are you concerned about data privacy protocols regarding the localized deployment in the Gulf?" Rayson stopped tapping his pen. He looked at Sarah with relief. "Exactly," Rayson said. "Thank you. Finally. Yes. We aren't worried about the money. The $2 billion is generous. We're terrified that your government is going to take our code and use it to track dissidents. We have a manifesto. We can't sell if the tech is weaponized." The room went silent. Zayd turned his head slowly to Arthur Sterling. "Arthur," Zayd said in English, his voice dangerously low. "Why did you tell me it was about the price?" Arthur pulled at his collar. I was simplifying, Your Highness. These technical details, I didn't want to bore you." "You told me they were greedy," Zayd said. "You told me to squeeze them. If I had offered more money today, they would have walked away, wouldn't they? Because money isn't the problem." Zayd looked back at Sarah. "Translate for me." Verbatim. Zayd spoke in Arabic, looking directly at Rayson. "Tell him," Zayd commanded Sarah, "that I am not the government. I am a private investor. Tell him that I will sign a binding clause in the contract that grants Titan Tech full autonomy over the privacy code. I want the profit, not the control." Sarah translated the promise instantly and elegantly. Rayson's face lit up. "Wait, really? You'd sign a non-interference clause?" "Yes," Sarah answered for Zayd. "Then we have a deal." Rayson smiled. "My God, we've been trying to ask for that for 3 weeks. But Mr. Sterling kept telling us, the Sheikh does not negotiate on control." Zayd stood up. The sound of his chair scraping the floor was like a gunshot. He turned to Arthur Sterling. Arthur was pale, sweating profusely. "Zayd, please," Arthur stammered. "I was trying to get you a better position. If we controlled the code, the value would triple. I was doing it for the fund." "Were you?" Sarah spoke up. She opened a folder she had been holding on her lap. During the car ride over, Sarah hadn't just been prepped on the deal. She had asked for Arthur's communication logs with the Titan team. Zaid had given her his access codes. "Because," Sarah said, pulling out a sheet of paper, "according to this email thread, you have a pending job offer from Titan's biggest competitor, Omnicorp, and your bonus with them is contingent on this deal failing." A gasp went around the room. Arthur Sterling's eyes bulged. You went through my emails. That's illegal." "I'm a consultant," Sarah said coolly. "I audit efficiency, and you, Arthur, are very inefficient." Zaid looked at Arthur with a mixture of disgust and pity. "Get out," Zaid said. "Zaid, listen to me. Get out." Zaid didn't shout. He didn't have to. "Before I throw you out the window." Arthur grabbed his briefcase and fled the room, the door slamming behind him. Zaid straightened his jacket. He turned to Rayson and extended his hand. "My apologies for the confusion," Zaid said in perfect English. "Shall we sign?" Later that evening, the limousine was quiet. They were driving back to the Pierre Hotel. Sarah felt exhausted, but exhilarated. She had just helped close a multi-billion-dollar deal. She had exposed a corporate spy. "You were magnificent," Zayed said, breaking the silence. He was looking at her from the other side of the car. There was no arrogance in his eyes now, only fascination. "I was doing my job," Sarah said. "Arthur was sloppy." "Arthur was a fool," Zaid said. "But you saved me. Not just the money. You saved my honor." He reached into the console and pulled out a bottle of water. He unscrewed the cap and handed it to her. "Room temperature," he said with a small smile. Sarah took it, a blush rising to her cheeks. "Thank you." "Sarah," Zaid said, his voice turning serious, "the week is not over, but I want to offer you something permanent. I need a new chief of strategy, someone who can't be bought." "I'm a waitress, Zaid," she said, repeating her line from the restaurant. "No," Zaid said softly. "You are a queen in exile." The car came to a sudden, screeching halt. Sarah was thrown forward, but Zaid's arm shot out, catching her before she hit the partition. "What is it?" Zaid barked at the driver. "Roadblock, sir," the driver said, his voice panicked. "Black van, men with guns." Sarah looked out the window. 3 men in balaclavas were approaching the car, assault rifles raised. "Get down," Zaid shouted, pushing Sarah onto the floor of the limo and covering her body with his own. Glass shattered as the first bullet struck the reinforced window. The twist wasn't over. Arthur Sterling hadn't just fled. He had made a call, and now the corporate war had turned physical. The world inside the limousine had turned into a claustrophobic nightmare of shattering safety glass and shouting. "Stay down!" Zaid roared, his hand pressing Sarah's head toward the plush carpeted floor. The bulletproof glass was spider webbing, turning opaque under the barrage of automatic fire. The driver, terrified but trained, threw the car into reverse, slamming into the SUV behind them. Metal crunched, a sickening sound of expensive steel folding like paper. "They're blocking the rear!" the driver screamed. "Sir, we're boxed in!" "Open the partition," Zaid commanded. He didn't wait. He kicked the door open on the side, facing away from the gunfire. The rain was torrential now, a curtain of grey water that blurred the streetlights. "Sarah!" Zaid grabbed her shoulder, his grip bruising. "When I say go, you run. You run to the subway entrance on the corner. Do not look back. Do not wait for me." "I'm not leaving you," Sarah shouted over the noise of the assault. "This is not a negotiation," Zaid snapped, his eyes wild with adrenaline. "Go!" He shoved her out of the car and into the cold rain. Sarah stumbled, her heels slipping on the wet asphalt. She kicked them off, running barefoot on the freezing New York pavement. She made it to the corner, but she didn't go down the subway stairs. She hid behind a concrete pillar, peeking back. Zaid hadn't followed her. He was fighting. He had engaged the first attacker who rounded the car. Zaid wasn't just a suit-wearing executive. He had served mandatory military service in the Royal Guard. He moved with brutal efficiency, disarming the gunman with a crack of bone and a heavy throw. But there were too many of them. 3 more men were closing in. Sarah saw Arthur Sterling's hired muscle raising a weapon toward Zaid's exposed back. "Behind you!" Sarah screamed in Arabic. "Warwick, ya Zaid!" The warning saved his life. Zaid spun around, dodging the blow, but the butt of the rifle clipped his temple. He went down, blood instantly mixing with the rain on his face. Sarah didn't think. She didn't calculate. She saw a construction site to her left, a pile of loose bricks and rebar. She grabbed a rusted iron bar, heavy and cold, and sprinted back toward the limousine. The gunman was standing over Zaid, aiming. Sarah swung the iron bar with every ounce of rage she had suppressed for 10 years. It connected with the gunman's knee. He howled, collapsing. Zaid looked up, his vision swimming. He saw Sarah Jenkins, barefoot, soaked, standing over him like a Valkyrie, wielding a piece of rusted metal. "Get up!" she yelled, hauling him by his lapels. "Get up, Your Highness, or we die here." Zaid groaned, stumbling to his feet. Adrenaline masked the pain in his head. He grabbed her hand, and together they ran. They scrambled over the hood of the crushed limousine, diving into the dark alleyway behind the hotel as bullets chipped the brickwork around them. They ran until their lungs burned. They navigated a maze of service corridors and back streets, finally collapsing behind a dumpster in a narrow, unlit alley 3 blocks away. Zaid leaned against the wet brick wall, sliding down until he was sitting on the ground. He pressed a hand to his temple. It came away red. "You are bleeding," Sarah said, breathless. She ripped the hem of her expensive silk blouse, tearing a strip of fabric to bind his head. "You came back," Zaid whispered, staring at her as if she were a hallucination. "I told you to run." "I don't take orders well," Sarah said, her hands shaking as she tied the makeshift bandage. "We established that at dinner." Zaid let out a breathless, pained laugh. He reached up and caught her hand, stopping her ministrations. "Why?" he asked. "I treated you like dirt. I fired you. I am the reason you are in this mess. Why save me?" Sarah looked at him. The rain had washed away her makeup, leaving her face raw and honest. "Because my father wouldn't have left you," she said quietly. "He believed in honor, even when the world took his away." Zaid closed his eyes for a moment. "Arthur," he murmured. "It was Arthur." "How do you know?" "The man I fought," Zaid said. He was wearing a security pin on his tactical vest. Omnicorp Security. That is the rival firm Arthur was defecting to. He didn't just want to leave Sarah. He wanted to liquidate me. If I die, the merger fails, the stock crashes, and Omnicorp buys my fund for pennies on the dollar. "We need to call the police," Sarah said, reaching for her pocket. Her phone was gone, dropped in the limo. "No police," Zaid said, struggling to stand. "Arthur has contacts in the precinct. That's how he knew where we were. We need to get to the Jordanian consulate. It's 6 blocks east." "You can barely walk," Sarah argued. "Then help me," Zaid said. He put his heavy arm around her shoulders, leaning his weight on her. Sarah gritted her teeth, bracing herself under his weight. She was small, and he was over 6 feet of muscle and bone, but she refused to buckle. "Walk, Zaid," she commanded. They moved through the shadows of the city, the billionaire and the waitress, bound together by blood and rain. As they walked, Zaid spoke, his voice slurring slightly from the concussion. "I looked into your father's file," he said. "Deeper." "Don't," Sarah warned. Focus on walking. I found the original transfer documents, Zaid continued, ignoring her. The money that was embezzled into your father's account. The signature authorizing the transfer was forged. But the digital footprint, it came from a terminal in the consulate. Sarah stopped. She almost dropped him. What? It was an inside job, Zaid rasped. Someone on the inside needed a scapegoat for their own theft. They chose Richard because he was too trusting. They destroyed a good man to buy themselves a yacht. Who? Sarah demanded, her voice trembling. Who was it? Zaid looked at her, his eyes dark with fury and pain. It was the junior financial attaché at the time, Zaid said, a young British man named Arthur Sterling. The world seemed to stop spinning for Sarah. The rain went silent. Arthur Sterling, the man who had been standing by Zaid's side for 5 years, the man who had just tried to kill them. He was the architect of her entire life's misery. He was the reason her father was dead. He was the reason her mother was dying in a state facility. A scream built up in Sarah's throat, but she swallowed it down. It turned into cold, hard resolve. He's not going to get away with it, Sarah said. Not this time. No, Zaid agreed, his grip on her shoulder tightening. He is not. Get me to the consulate, Sarah, and I promise you, by sunrise, Arthur Sterling will wish he had never been born. The morning sun broke over Manhattan, crisp and clear, mocking the violence of the night before. Inside the Jordanian consulate, the atmosphere was military. The Sovereign Guard had secured the perimeter. Doctors were tending to Zaid's head wound in the secure safe room. Sarah sat in the corner, wrapped in a blanket, sipping tea that was too sweet. She was numb. Zaid stood up, waving the doctors away. He had a bandage around his head, but his energy was back. He was no longer the injured man in the alley. He was the sheikh, and he was terrifying. Is the team ready? Zaid asked his head of security. Yes, Your Highness. We have located Sterling. He is at Teterboro Airport, attempting to board a private jet to the Cayman Islands. Ground the plane, Zaid ordered, and bring him here. Do not arrest him. I want him brought to me. Sir, the NYPD. I said bring him to me. Zaid's voice shook the walls. He attacked a diplomatic convoy. He is under my jurisdiction now. 2 hours later, Arthur Sterling was thrown onto the floor of the consulate's office. He was zip-tied and looking disheveled. When he looked up and saw Zaid sitting behind the desk, alive, his face went white. Then he saw Sarah standing by the window. You, Arthur whispered. You're supposed to be dead. Disappointing, isn't it? Zaid said calmly. He picked up a file from his desk. You were very busy last night, Arthur. Attempted murder. Corporate espionage. You can't prove anything, Arthur spat, trying to regain his composure. I'll sue you for kidnapping. And then there is this, Zaid said, ignoring him. He threw a piece of paper onto the floor in front of Arthur. It was a copy of an old bank transfer, dated 10 years ago. I had my forensic accountants trace the metadata on the old embassy server, Zaid said. You were sloppy, Arthur. You left a digital fingerprint. You stole $4 million, framed Ambassador Jenkins, and used the money to buy your way into the financial sector. Arthur stared at the paper. It was a long time ago. The statute of limitations does not apply to treason against the crown, Zaid said, which is what you committed when you stole from a joint diplomatic account. Sarah stepped forward. She walked until she was standing right in front of Arthur. She looked down at the man who had ruined her family. My father killed himself, Sarah said softly. He couldn't live with the shame. You killed him, Arthur, just as surely as if you had pulled the trigger. Arthur sneered. Your father was weak. He didn't know how the game was played. Zaid moved so fast it was a blur. He slammed his hand onto the desk. The game is over, Zaid said. The FBI is waiting outside. You are going to prison, Arthur, for the fraud, for the attempted murder, and for the theft. You will rot." "Wait!" Arthur panicked as the guards grabbed him. "Zaid, I can help you. I know secrets. I know—" "Get him out of my sight," Zaid said. Arthur was dragged out, screaming. The silence that followed was heavy. Sarah walked to the window, looking out at the city. It was finally over. The monster was gone. "Sarah," Zaid said. She turned. Zaid was standing holding a velvet box, but it wasn't a ring. He opened it. Inside was a golden pin, the crest of the Al-Hassan Sovereign Fund. "The merger went through this morning," Zaid said. "Titan Tech signed. We won." "Congratulations," Sarah said. "You got your empire." "It means nothing," Zaid said. He walked over to her. "It means nothing without people I can trust. Sarah, I don't want you to be a consultant. I want you to be my partner. Not an employee, a partner." Sarah blinked. I don't understand." "I am opening a new division of the fund," Zaid said, "dedicated to ethical technology and restoring diplomatic relations. I want you to run it. You will have full autonomy, a salary of $5 million a year. And—" he paused, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a folded document. "And this." He handed it to her. It was a royal decree, signed by Zaid's father, the king. It was a full, public exoneration of Richard Jenkins. It declared him innocent of all charges and restored his rank posthumously. Sarah stared at the paper. The words swam before her eyes. Tears, hot and fast, spilled down her cheeks. She pressed the paper to her chest and sobbed. It was the first time she had let herself cry in years. Zaid didn't say a word. He simply stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her. He held her while she cried for her father, for her mother, for the lost years. When she finally pulled back, she wiped her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "No," Zaid said, wiping a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "Thank you. You taught me that language is not just words. It is truth. And you are the only truth I have found in this city." "So," Sarah sniffed, a small smile returning to her face. "Does this mean I get a corner office?" Zaid laughed, a genuine, warm sound that filled the room. "You get the whole floor," he said, "and as much sparkling water as you want, without ice." Sarah laughed, too. She looked at the man who had been her enemy, her tormentor, and finally, her savior. "I accept," she said. Sarah Jenkins didn't just survive, she ascended. With the money from her contract, her mother was moved to the best private facility in Zurich, where she lived her final years in comfort and dignity. Sarah became a titan of industry in her own right, known as the Iron Diplomat, the woman who could silence a boardroom with a whisper. And as for Sheikh Zaid, he never forgot the lesson of Table 4. He became known not just for his wealth, but for his fairness. He and Sarah never married. Some legends are better left undefined, but they were never seen apart. They traveled the world, a force of nature, reminding everyone they met that power doesn't come from a suit or a title. True power comes from the strength to stand in the rain, barefoot, and fight for what is right. And that is the story of Sarah and the Sheikh. It proves that you should never judge a book by its cover, or a waitress by her apron. You never know who you are talking to, or what battles they are fighting. If you enjoyed this story of justice, revenge, and redemption, please smash that like button, share this video with a friend who needs some inspiration, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories of karma and destiny.